Did you catch the Mass at Notre Dame? I was away last week up in the panhandle of Texas, actually with very, very little internet connection, and so I missed a whole lot. One of the things I missed was the very first Mass at Notre Dame in Paris. And so when I got back and I saw some of the commentary, especially in regards to the Vestments, I couldn't help. I reached out to Michael Hichborn to be on with us to discuss and get his hot take, as well as discuss other hot takes on Notre Dame. Michael, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Praise be to God, I can. Good to have you on. And happy belated Feast Day of the Immaculate Conception to you, by the way. Appreciate your time today. So,
Yeah, you bet.
Notre Dame, it's very interesting to see the hot takes on the first Mass. But just before we jump into that, what do you think about the actual reconstruction? What do you think? How do you think they did on the reconstruction? Do you think they did a good job? Is it as beautiful as it always has been? What was your opinion?
Well, okay, so I thought the restoration of the stone was magnificent because it did restore the glory and the beauty of the white stone that was on the interior. We have to remember, we have this impression of Gothic cathedrals being dark and, the stone being dark and it's kind of a iron and everything else. But the original stone was very white, and the idea is that it's supposed to draw our minds and our attention and our focus to heaven. And that's why the ceilings are so high. It's why the walls are so high, because we're supposed to be thinking of the Most High. So in regard to that, I thought it was fantastic. But when I was looking at the fact that they have a glorious restoration of the stone, and they did put the high altar back where it belongs and everything else, but then they have this. There's really
Upside
no
down egg. It's like, how do you describe this thing?
Yeah, there's no other way to put it but stupid. It's a stupid looking little stone slab stuck in the middle of the entire cathedral that they call an altar. And it's not inspiring. It doesn't even look like anything. It's modernist reductionist garbage. And they stuck it right in the middle. And how do you have the most glorious cathedral in all of Christendom and then this stupid little stone thing dead center? And that's the pinnacle. That's where you're supposed to be having the most sublime Mass. And you're gonna celebrate Mass on that? I mean, that was my thought. And then, of course, looking at the vestments and the vessels that they used for the Mass, it was just they have this glorious restoration of the cathedral, but then they celebrated Mass with modernist pablum.
That was approved by the Archbishop. I mean, that's really the buck stops with him. His responsibility is in approving these things. But how much control did the state have on the decisions made to decorate or to restore?
Well, I mean, the state had they had certain things that they had wanted to do. I remember seeing something about putting a cafe on top of the cathedral, or they wanted to have a glass ceiling instead of the restored arches on top of the roof. But none of that was approved. They didn't go with that, and they did try to restore the roof as closely to the original as they could. They didn't have the cathedral, so it seems that there is room for pushback and for, hey, this is the Catholic Church, and even though you the state somehow own the cathedral, you don't have ultimate authority over how to handle matters of the church. So they were able to push back on that, and they did keep it to at least mostly what it was originally intended to look like.
I guess most people haven't even thought about this. Why does the church feel the need to continue to cooperate with the French Revolution? Like, I don't understand. Shouldn't the church stand up and say, you know what, the French Revolution is over, and we're taking back our property. You don't get to decide how these things work. It's ours. We're doing it. Like, why don't they just do that? Why do they continue to cooperate with this French revolutionary idea?
Well, I think that's a good question. I can't answer to why they would do that. I think that maybe they feel that there's no alternative because the French Revolution did seize all of their assets. They don't own any of the churches or cathedrals. Those are owned by the state, and the state determines how much is spent to restore things. And I mean, it's a good question as to why you would go along with that. The chances are they probably don't see how they have an alternative.
Yeah, it just boggles the mind. But let's not hesitate any longer. Let's jump right into those vestments. What in the world? It was hilarious. These giant blocks of primary colors. And people were slamming these things online. One person I saw, equated them to Uno cards, like to the wild card in an Uno deck. And then somebody else to the Eastern Star, I think it was Matt Gaspers, bringing up how closely coordinated they are to the colors of the Freemason Eastern Star branch, which is hilarious to me. So what did you think of those vestments?
When I first saw the vestments themselves, I thought that it looked like a birthday cake with sprinkles. It was pretty banal. And of course, you have the Windows logo cope that was worn by the Archbishop as he processed in, on top of the birthday cake rainbow sprinkle vestments that they wore. And, this is precisely where I think what we're looking at is the summing of the nose at the restoration of the glory of Christendom in the cathedral. Is that the restoration of the cathedral, I mean, I thought they did a good job. But then when you say you invite the world in, the world is watching, and you don't use the most glorious vestments. You use something that looks stupid to celebrate Mass on an altar that looks stupid. And then you use vessels for the Mass that look like something came out right out of Star Trek. It's ridiculous, and it's a mockery. And you have the whole world watching. You've got the world leaders in attendance. And I mean, the concert that they had prior to the Mass, I thought was more sublime.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was watching the video, and Latin Mass parts. They said the Our Father in Latin. That's beautiful. Like that's a good thing. So how do we explain the schizophrenia, and how much money was spent on these vestments? They had a famous, I guess, artiste, or I have no idea, make these vestments, design these vestments. How can you design primary colors? Big blocks of primary colors is not a design, people. But nonetheless, they have all of these vestments manufactured, probably at a lot of money. It costs a lot of money, so that everybody processing in would be coordinated and matched, to include Cardinal Dolan from New York that was there, and all that effort only to not make it as they could have used the high altar. It would have been glorious and beautiful and amazing and inspirational. But instead, they choose to do this. It's like they're so insistent on this stuff, even though the stats would I would argue prove that young Catholics don't want this anymore. They don't want this emotionalism that we're seeing played out over and over again.
It's not just the emotionalism; it's the banality. I used the word banal earlier, and I think that that's really the only word that we can use to describe what we're seeing. The designer that designed the vestments he's a French fashion designer. His name is Jean-Charles Marquis de Castelbas, and he did. He designed a coat that was worn by Madonna. He designed a sequin jacket for Beyonce, a costume for Rihanna. I mean, he designed costumes for Lady Gaga. Why are we having a pop star fashion designer designing liturgical vestments? What does he know about
whose decision was that?
That's a good question. I don't know. But somebody made that decision, and it turns out this guy is an active homosexual.
Of course. Why not? And maybe that's why there's primary colors.
Right. What it boils down to, once again, is it's a reduction of the beauty that we should be seeing in the most sublime act in the church, and putting something that is unsuitable or unfitting for the sacrifice of the Mass, and saying and calling it fitting and saying that this is what you're mocking the Mass by doing this.
Yeah, we're coming up to a break here with Michael Hichborn from Lepanto Institute, talking and reacting to the Notre Dame. I'd love to get everybody's take on this. I think our stream is down right now. Unfortunately, I think we're just on the radio side of things. I'm not sure we're going to get to go into the after show, but I do want to cover some of these hot takes coming up after the break, Michael. Like some were surprising. Some were way more positive than I thought they were going to be. Michael Matt at the Remnant, I'm thinking of you. Like I didn't see that coming, but he was happy-go-lucky. If we can, if time permits, because it's going to be quick here, I want to talk about Concelebration if possible. But before we do that, let's talk about Michael Matt's reaction to all of this. I didn't see him being the guy that was like all positive. Like he didn't seem all that bothered by Notre Dame. He was very favorable, wouldn't you say?
I thought he was. I read his reaction, and he was a lot more. I'm not sure what the word would be, but he just
upbeat.
He seemed to. What's that?
Upbeat.
Yeah, I guess upbeat.
Pretty happy.
I mean, he was rather satisfied with it, and he said, "Look, pay no attention to the trappings, pay no attention to the garbage that they were doing. The revolution will be overturned at some point. But the restoration of the cathedral was marvelous, and he was very, very pleased with that."
Yeah, he says no guitars or zippy zithers, mixed bag vestments. He says the choir was out of this world. The ordinary was sung in Latin, as was the Pater Noster. I was surprised, but happily so. He says the relics, the bane of our dialogue partners' existence, were treated with the utmost ceremonial respect as they were solemnly placed inside the altar. He even, like, when it comes to the altar, he's like, he actually dismisses it like it'll go away someday, so I'm not all that concerned. I mean, and you're right, Michael Matt, you're right. Of course, you're right about that. However, like, we shouldn't tolerate this terrible, ugly altar. It is a travesty. It is an insult to God's goodness, and yet we do. We give it a pass. I don't like that. I don't want to give it a pass. But Michael Matt is being very generous here with his very upbeat commentary on this. But let me give you a contrast to this, and that is the European conservatives, Dr. Helene Luzon, whom, again, we've interviewed on this show before. I'll link to her article today in the show notes at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. She says, quote, "As a French woman, as a Catholic, I should be rejoicing, but my heart isn't really in it. The restored Notre Dame is whiter than it has ever been, but the soot that has been stripped from the stones, the repentance of men and the prayers accumulated within these walls over the centuries has been washed away to create a smooth, uneven face at the image of a hygienic modern world too proud of itself. A little of the soul of Notre Dame has gone." She goes on, "And what about the opening ceremony? With 2 days to go to celebrate the anniversary of the separation of church and state," let that sink in, "President Macron could not stop himself from speaking inside the cathedral despite promises to the contrary. And his wife, Brigitte Macron, took communion with the Archbishop, even though she lives with a man in a union that is anything but canonical, to say the least. All in a blissful unanimity maintained by a church in France that no longer really knows where it stands." She's less joyful than Michael Matt, wouldn't you say?
I would, and I think that those are valid and right criticisms of what took place with the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral. And this is the problem with where we are in the situation with the church right now, is that we can see that there are beautiful things. We can see that there are great and glorious things in the church because those things are eternal and they're timeless and they will continue on. The church has not been destroyed. But at the other hand of it, you have revolutionaries in the church who are doing whatever they can to make a mockery of the Mass, to make a mockery of the sacraments, to attack our ability to practice our faith as our fathers have practiced the faith. And we have to stand up and continue to point out there is a discontinuity between the revolutionaries and the church herself. And the more we accept or embrace the muddying of those waters, the more difficult it becomes to discern which is a revolutionary act and which is an act of the church herself.
You know, one of the images that got bandied about social media quite a lot, actually, was the image of all of these bishops and priests surrounding the altar. You know, as traditional Catholics, we cringe a wee bit there. You know, Concelebration is not something that we experience in the 62 Missal. And you had to look it up. And what did you find, Michael Hichborn?
Well, I was actually very surprised to learn that the practice of co-celebration is something that even Thomas Aquinas defended. I thought that this was a modern innovation, that this was something that was only recently invented. And no, I was surprised that, co-celebration goes way back, and that Thomas Aquinas even defended it and said, look, when you have multiple priests surrounding the same altar and they are consecrating the Eucharist, they are all consecrating the same host. So it was very surprising to me. I did not expect to find this.
But I think it begs the question. Fine, it goes back to antiquity. But as traditional Catholics, do we argue that everything from an antiquity is therefore right and good and must be kept and preserved? Or could there be organic development?
But to be honest, it seems that this was not it was a practice, but it wasn't something that was done on a regular basis. In other words...
Or universally.
Or universally, right. That it was something that was permitted, but not a standard. So I think that there is an issue to be had with this taking place as the norm. And that can be discussed by theologians. I'm really not a theologian. Sure. I only play with TV. But I do think that there is something to be said for maintaining the Mass as a solitary act with a priest and the congregants behind him observing the Mass and praying with the priest rather than participating. This idea of active participation is also a problem. But there is an issue there that needs to be addressed. But again, when you have modernity pushing these ideologies on us and there's a muddying of the water between what has always been practiced in the church and what is a modern innovation, after a while you lose a sense of where we really are. And it makes things very difficult.
You know, it's one of those things, like when you see a priest wearing a cassock in public, it stands in great contrast. It's the witness to the world that needs, it's similarly, the Holy Mass. This is a great opportunity. The leaders of governments were there. Donald Trump was there. I mean, what a witness it could have been if they would have used the high altar, used more beautiful and intricate vestments that would have cost way less money to produce, I'm sure, because they already had them and they didn't need to go create new ones. I mean, think about the witness opportunity that's missed in that, don't you think?
Look at the Old and New Testament. Whenever you had something really, really, really important happening in the Bible, they always went up a mountain. You don't have a single instance of God coming down from the mountain to meet the people where they are. It's always Moses going up to the mountain, or Elijah going up the mountain, or Christ and his apostles going up the mountain. And then something marvelous happens on top of the mountain. What do you think the mountain is? The mountain is the Mass.
Yep.
So
Hebrews
why
12.
Are we... Exactly. So why are we taking the Mass and saying, no, we have to come down from the mountain and approach the people from that perspective? It's backwards. It's absolutely backwards.
Perhaps, if we're being honest, we really just want this world. We don't want what comes on the other side of the Jordan. Perhaps we don't really want the beatific vision. We just want what we have now. Maybe that's our problem.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.